So having knocked down pretty much every moral philosophy since the pre-Socratics, how does Nietzsche reconstruct a moral philosophy that can be rid of resentment while celebrating the power and dignity of mankind without a sort of opposition, an opposition to other individuals? Well, Nietzsche's work sort of values, I think, 6 different qualities: power, affirmation, truthfulness, art and artistry, specifically in sort of contrast the relation with rationality, freedom of spirit, and pluralism. And it would be far too much to talk about all of these. So what we're going to do for this week is just focus on the concept of power, because Nietzsche's concept of power was highly influential for the branch of continental philosophy that came after him. So certainly Freud, but also Bergson, Althusser, Hart and Negri use this concept of power, Foucault, and lots of the contemporary sort of new materialists, and it was incredibly influential. And I also think it's influential for a reason. It's very important. So that's what we're going to focus on. Nietzsche contrasts perhaps traditional understandings of power, which are often sort of classified as forms of domination, with a different conception of power that he calls the will to power. So let's just take Thomas Hobbes' definition of power, which in his work he understands as simply no more but the excess of power of one above that of another. And so this is the sort of understanding of power whereby A can get B something to do something that B would otherwise not want to do. And the point that Nietzsche makes is that this is a particular kind of externalized power. It's a form of power that is measured, between my body and the thing that I want to affect, right? So my body has an action, and that action causes something else to work or to do something, right? So it's externalized from my body. But for Nietzsche, power has to be conceived as internalized, right? So yes, I do things. I might switch on a light, or turn on my computer or something like that, or give a lecture. But that's not just my body and everything outside of my body doing stuff. It's not like I'm this automaton and this autonomous body does stuff that has an effect on anything. No, I have a set of what he calls drives. And this is actually something that Hobbes talks about as well. Certain drives that we have inside of us. A psychology, almost, that pushes us to do certain things, right? And there are various different drives, but one of the important ones for Nietzsche is this drive, or this will to power. Now, power can't just be understood as limiting, because in the same way as, for example, an internal combustion engine uses power to drive the wheels around, right? We have the combustion of petrol, which creates an explosion that pushes a piston, and that piston turns a crankshaft, which turns the wheels, right? That power is productive. So is the power that is our will to power, right? It leads us to do things. And one of those things that it leads us to do is overcome ourselves. So power is self-overcoming. What do we mean by self-overcoming? Self-overcoming is to acknowledge our own limitations and try to overcome them. So we do this when we acknowledge that we don't understand the philosophy that we're listening to or reading. When we go for a run and we have our personal best and we want to go beyond it. When we want to get a job and we realise that our situation is not where we wanted to be. and we want to do better than that. When we want to learn more, everything for Nietzsche can be characterized as a recognition or a lack of recognition of our own limitations, and a trying or lack of trying to overcome them. And so the will to power is an inherent part of us, connected to our self-overcoming, and it is in our nature to do this. And because it's in our nature, like with birds of prey and with flashes of light, we shouldn't resent it. Right? The will to power, our drive to self-overcome, should not be resented in us. Right? We should acknowledge and we should celebrate our drive to do better, to exceed our limitations. Once more, the lightning doesn't flash. It's not like lightning has a potential to flash greater than sometimes it can. On a bad day, lightning wakes up and doesn't flash as brightly as sometimes it does. After going to lightning school, it does better. No, lightning is the flash. So we need to appreciate our potential and our drive to flash as we are. Deleuze describes this. He says, the will to power alone is the one that wills. It does not let itself be delegated or alienated to another subject, even to force. What does this mean? What Deleuze is trying to get to here is that the will to power, if it's truly allowed to flourish, won't be limited by outside forces or by dogmas or by controls. It will flourish, it will act, taking those things on board, but making decisions for itself. So, a fairly tame example of this might be, breaking the speed limit. There are some people who will stick at the speed limit regardless of where they are in the world, middle of the desert, staying at, 70 miles an hour, that sort of thing. And Nietzsche would go, of course, that is ridiculous. That is taking the law as a transcendental sort of category or categorical imperative, if you will, that you must follow because you must follow the law. Why? That is denying your will to power, your will to overcome. Now, if there is traffic around you and there is a speed limit of 70 miles an hour and it seems prescient or it seems like a good idea to follow the traffic light, that is you choosing to following the traffic light, following the speed limit. That is you choosing to follow the speed limit because that has been presented to you and you have deemed it to be a sensible idea. That is you exercising your will to power. But subordinating yourself to rules dogmatically is inhibiting yourself, whatever those rules, whatever they might be. So the will to power is the aspect of people that drives their activity to surmount, overcome, and self-actualize. And this is something for Nietzsche that we ought to encourage. If we're not encouraging it, we're not doing ourselves justice. We're not overcoming ourselves and our own limitations. We are literally limiting ourselves, which is surely the worst thing that we could say that we possibly did. Another aspect of power that has to be mentioned before we start talking about the Übermensch is that power is not reactive. Or at least it's not always reactive. Well, for Nietzsche, it's probably never reactive, actually. It's not necessarily in opposition to other forces, but rather it takes them into account. So even if, we hear a gunshot and we dodge down so that we don't get hit by something, for Nietzsche, that's not a reaction against something. That's our exercising our power, our will to power, to do something that makes sense, that would be good for us. Yeah, I'm trying to think of examples off the cuff where we might be said to be reactive, but actually, no, it's not reaction. It's just doing things that seem to make sense. So, for example, when you're having an argument, maybe, and you say something off the cuff, Nietzsche wouldn't say that's you necessarily just being reactive. that's you doing, you're exercising your will to power, perhaps not necessarily in the best way. You've been mistaken in the right way to approach the situation. And you need to understand why it is that you approached the situation using the will to power, but applying it in that particular way. But in that sense, you're not being reactive. It's not a reaction that you had no control over. No, it's your duty to perform a genealogy on yourself and understand why it is that you made that reaction, so that you can maybe change the way you react in the future. So maybe you can see one of the reasons why I like the work of Nietzsche so much. He's not encouraging us to dominate over others, but he is encouraging us to take responsibility for our actions, in the knowledge that there are contexts and backgrounds to our actions which in part determine why we do take those actions. We just need to learn what they are so that we can configure them in the future. I've mentioned love a few times so far this lecture, and I really do think that Nietzsche's ethics are a form of love, and a form of not just self-love, but a love for the other as well, a love for the multiple or the plural. And that's because he refuses to hate things for what they are, or even really to dislike things for what they are. He might look down on the stupid actions or the poor moral thinkings of other people, and he's very cutting in his language about almost everybody. But there's certainly this sense of love that he feels for things, again, because they are just people expressing, just things expressing their will for power. So he says this: I want to learn more and more to see as beautiful what is necessary in things. Then I shall be one of those who make things beautiful. Amor fati, let that be my love henceforth. I do not want to wage war against what is ugly. I do not want to accuse. I do not even want to accuse those who accuse. Looking away shall be my only negation. And all in all, and on the whole, someday I wish to be only a yes-sayer. So there are an ethics of love, there are an ethics of affirmation, of affirming the other, understanding their essence and celebrating it, even if you then choose to sort of turn away and go in a different direction because that's not for you. Okay, so a break from resentment. So this is how he approaches morality, but I understand you're probably at this moment going, well, how do we make a moral decision? For Kant, we have a categorical imperative. For Bentham, we had a hedonic calculus. Well, what about for Nietzsche? Well, Nietzsche doesn't disappoint. He has one, and it's called the eternal recurrence. The eternal recurrence is based upon, again, power. It says if we embrace power, we can reach a place where we do not have to reproach others for their sins. When it's no longer necessary for us to do that. We don't have to look at the good and feel resentment for them. We just understand that that's what they do, and we have to do otherwise. So the eternal recurrence, or the eternal return as it sometimes gets put, goes like this. It says, seeing to it that our own influence on all that is yet to come balances and outweighs his, the others, let our brilliance make them look dark. No, let us not become darker ourselves on their account, like all those who punish. Let us look away. So again, don't sully yourselves because other people are doing bad. Be yourself and be excellent in it. Look towards, he says, the eternal recurrence. And the eternal recurrence, we can paraphrase as this. He says, our life is good only if, upon imagining its return in every detail, we can affirm it as it is. Look back in your life. Would you do everything again? And if so, it's a good life. Now, of course, this sounds harsh because you've probably lived through a bunch of events that you would have done differently. I certainly have, right? There are things that I would, if I were to do them again, act differently. But I would never expect to be perfectly good. I mean, That would be an idea for the gods, wouldn't it? So instead, treat every event that you go through in the way that you would do it again if it came back to you. And when you're looking at your life, can you say that of the rest of your life? If so, you can say it's more or less a good life. That's how Nietzsche wants us to go through our lives. It's respecting ourselves, our own dignity, and our ability to decide for ourselves and make judgments for ourselves. And it's a way of sort of doing this in different events without having to prescribe for ourselves what we would do. Would we do it again if we could? So it's similar to the categorical imperative, it is, but the categorical imperative is outside of us, right? This is the tribunal that Nietzsche talks about. We hold ourselves against a court of the categorical imperative, the rules of which we've set out in front of us. Well, did we live according to the categorical imperative? If no, we're morally bad. If yes, then we're morally good. But the eternal recurrence embraces who we are. It affirms us in the moment, not what should be. That's the difference between it and the categorical imperative. And against utilitarians, where the good, i.e. happiness, is told to us in advance, this is, we pursue the good, therefore the good is good, moral egoism, and we're expected to agree before living it out, it asks, well, is happiness always good? Are we sure about that? Are we sure about that objective claim? Is sadness, is pain not sometimes good to the extent that it helps us grow? Do we not become more excellent through the tragedies of our lives? More sombre or better thinking, more profound as a result of our misfortunes? Well, sometimes yes, not always, sometimes yes. It depends how we act through these events. But to prescribe in advance an objective characteristic like happiness would, for Nietzsche, be too strong. Where is this coming to then? What's Nietzsche's ideal? It's this, the Übermensch. And he talks about this a couple of times, once in his book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, which is a particularly interesting one, but actually a few more times. And the Übermensch is this figure that Nietzsche describes. This is in particular towards the end of his life, and it's clear that maybe his mental faculties are going a little bit. It's not clear to what extent Nietzsche models the Übermensch on himself in his work, but philosophically at least, the Übermensch, which in English gets translated to maybe the Superman or the Overman or something like that. I don't like any of those translations, so I'm going to just keep Übermensch. It's kind of his ideal moral individual, ideal in that, obviously it will never exist. It's an ideal to which to aspire to. And it's an individual who's able to sort of establish their own values without any resentment towards anyone else whatsoever, who sort of embodies that attitude of actually turning the cheek and actually looking away whilst respecting everybody else and respecting themselves. To act by themselves and for themselves, not in spite of anybody else. So it's somebody that can embrace rationality of science and the creativity of art. And I've not played up too much Nietzsche's appreciation of art, except for at the beginning when I talked about Nietzsche's love of Wagner, and he really appreciated Wagner for his sort of very emphatic, very grandiose music, which was full of life, he thought. So you need to be able to appreciate both, right? The creativity of artistic practices, but also the rational side of science, and mix the two to create a good life. And then lastly, the Übermensch is somebody who can affirm the nature of challenges and other morals, right? Nietzsche is, of course, well aware that life is hard and we go through trials, but we need to love those trials for what they are, for their ability to, be what they are. Lightning is lightning, birds of prey are birds of prey, but also their ability to help us challenge ourselves and help us develop our own lives and develop ourselves. Because if we did not go through these challenges, we wouldn't have the possibility to make ourselves better people. So the Übermensch is somebody who appreciates the world and the challenges and the events that we go through, appreciates the other morals and the other moralities for what there are, but does not assume that they are a priori goods. They're things to be taken into account and articulated in their own practice. So is this a relativism? I don't think so. I don't think it is. Because a relativism would assume that all morals have equal outcomes. Right? It doesn't matter what we choose because everything is valued in the same way. And I don't think that's the case, because I think Nietzsche diagnoses the effects of other moral philosophies, right, the good-bad and the good-evil distinction, and he offers a critique of them, right? So it can't be that he thinks that all moral choices are equal. There are some that are more profound and that lead to our development better or worse than others are. So I think that's one of his sort of moral criteria, distinctions. It's an ethical personality, it's not a moral personality. Morality is in the basis of sort of establishing what is good or bad for everyone to do. It's in the business of telling other people what would be good or bad for them. Ethical philosophy is, on the other hand, is what would be good or bad for the person who is making the ethical decision, right? For their health, for their betterment. So Nietzsche is an ethical philosopher. He's not really a moral philosopher. It is personal. So, that's why he gets called a relativist sometimes. But it's based upon the 6 criteria that I listed earlier, of which we've gone through power today. Now, that's the bibliography. And that's it. That's the last lecture of the year. I'm glad that we got to finish it on Nietzsche. I hope you'll forgive me taking some liberties and waxing poetic a little bit. But there are some philosophers that make me glad for doing what I do, and I hope I've been able to convey that a little bit in this lecture. What we make of this in the seminars and the workshops, I have no idea, but I look forward to speaking to you about it then. See you later in the week.